Okay, good morning. I think we had a very two insightful talks from Louis and Michael. So I'll give a little bit different perspective, more from a practitioner and from the governmental point of view, how we try to apply science of cities to some of these complex problems that we face as urban planners. So I think all of you are based in Singapore, so you know we're a very small country, 700 over square kilometers, but many needs. And planning has become more difficult. We have a lot of big trends that are affecting us, whether it's rising aspirations, aging population, economical, the economics in the world has changed, from a very open now to have a more bipolar or more contested environment. The need for being more environmentally conscious comes through our impact on climate change. Later this year, or probably I think early next year, we will release V3, which is the climatic model for Singapore. Of course, we also have things that affected us recently, like the pandemic, and hence the need to be more resilient, etc. And of course, technology itself is accelerating quickly. So I think my chairman talked about a great acceleration where lots of the scientific advances, the technology advances have been in a very compressed timeline. And that gives us more things to think about, less time to plan. Yeah. So city planning, I think we all know as the academia or industry or the practitioners in the government looking at this, the city itself is a complex system. So Michael and Louis have talked about it, and we all know intuitively it is a city. What makes it complex? I think there are a few things that make it more complex. First, that we are dealing with different scales that Louis talked about. We're dealing at the home scale, the neighborhood scale, the district scale, the town scale, and of course the city or the country scale. Then we're also dealing with different time dimensions. For us in Singapore, we have a long-term plan, which we just completed last year. We look at horizons of about 50-year horizon, but we also have master plan, which is about 15-year horizon. And of course, developments happen in real time and operations happen in real time. So we have different time scales. And of course, when we look at the city, we have to take care of multiple stakeholders. I think Louis alluded to it to say that while everybody is different, we try to generalize as science, but effectively we have about a 5 million population here in Singapore, 5.5. And we have to look after all the different interests, and all the different stakeholders may have different objectives or different values or different preferences, different wants and needs. How do we try to take care of all of them? So we feel that a scientific approach with modeling and simulation can help us better understand how the city works, how we can manage some of this complexity. So I'll talk about some of these attributes and how we try to deal with it in my subsequent examples. So the first thing is many of the things we don't really have a good grasp of it. So it's very qualitative. The nature of the problem is very qualitative. So how do we frame issues with quantitative indicators? How do we quantify things that are inherently very difficult to put in numerical terms? Then, of course, I talked about the rapidly changing environment. So how do we deal with that? One way is to try to respond quickly, how to move in quick steps to some of the new emerging events or emerging trends. Of course, the future by nature is uncertain, but how do we generate scenarios to try to help us understand and what to avoid and what to aim for and how to optimize across multiple needs. Then I talked about having multiple needs. So there's multiple dimensions to the problems. It's not a single scale. And hence we need to try to model different what-if scenarios and where these different factors come together. And lastly, I talked about having multiple stakeholders and trade-offs. And one of the ways we try to cope is to work together with the multiple stakeholders and to iterate the process. Yeah. So I'll give some examples of how we try to do some of these things in a more science-based approach going forward. So the first example for some of this non-quantitative or difficult to quantify issues. I'll use two examples, two recent grant calls I caught. So the first one is on the relationship, or what I call senior housing typology. How do the housing types and the neighborhoods affect the quality of lives of seniors? And then another grant call I just closed last week, which is the relationship of the built environment and mental well-being. So both of these topics are very difficult to quantify. So how do you quantify health and wellness, quality of living, etc.? So we are through these projects are, I would say, first few projects that we are trying to take a step at building up a repertoire of indicators on how the built environment interacts with well-being, whether it's for the elderly for the first project or mental well-being for the second project. I see this as an ongoing conversation. I've been talking to many of my colleagues in other government agencies. We're trying to find a certain range of indicators that we can use across multiple research projects. Because in the past, we had multiple cohort studies, but everybody is using different indicators. So I cannot extrapolate across the different cohorts. When you look at the young, you look at the old, they're all using different indicators. So we're trying to maybe find some common vocabulary, common indicators. So these two projects that we launched are, in a way, early steps towards that journey. And we're trying to correlate causal relationships from the built environment to health. And some of these factors or some of these influences may not show up in the short term. So we're also prepared to invest in longitudinal studies to look at things at a longer time horizon. And finally, to translate some of this research, we hope that the research can give us ideas of design of policy interventions that we can put into our planning. So it will affect your living environment. We also see modelings that can support timely and effective response. So the example I give here is how we made the shift towards electric vehicles. So this is a part of our national movement. As you know, we announced that we are going to have a fully electrical vehicle fleet by 2040, and effectively you cannot register a new internal combustion engine vehicle by 2030. So that's the broad direction, okay? But how do you execute? And in the early days, we were very concerned about the adequacy of the charging network, okay? So in order to buy EV, you need to charge. So we wanted to have a very quick way to help us get confident that our grid can support the network. Power generation, substations, local substations, or even the local switch rooms. So I think we worked with A-Star, we work with Tung, we work with ETH, a few of the agencies come together. There's a project there's a model called Sept to help us be more confident. I think they are also speaking in one of the later events. But even before Sept, okay, Sept started in May 2020. Actually, we were launching land sales. And every building that we launch, the lease is for 9 years. And we know that this is coming. So the building will be out of date the moment it's built if we didn't put in certain requirements for EV charging. So actually my team and I, we actually did a very simple back of envelope calculations because we already had gantry data, so we took a quick look. We knew the daily mileage from normal vehicles, from taxis, etc. And we knew how frequent they need to charge. So me and my team just came up with a very simple formula. Okay, you need to charge once every 5 days. Roughly 20% of your car parks need to be ready for slow charging. So our premise was for slow charging is better for the grid. But we also know that car parks are not full. We look at some of the occupancy rates for HDB car parks. It ranged from 40 to 50% to 80%. They're never 100% full, even at night when everybody is back parking. So we took a rule of thumb, 15%. So 15% passive provision for slow charging. So that's what we did. Okay, so we imposed that as a land sales conditions about three years ago, even before we had any models. So it was just a back of the envelope calculation. We did quick and dirty so that the buildings can be more future ready. But we know that if the number is wrong, we can adjust along the way. So it's fine. We just came out with a rough number. Every land sales, we put it as a condition. HDB followed us, and they put it in for all the new buildings in Tengah, etc. as well. And then now LTA had the act that was passed last year. So they told me actually our back-of-the-envelope calculation was not far off. They did a lot more detailed simulations and calculations. We're not very far off. So in a sense, I think models give us confidence to move forward, but we don't have to wait until all the information is in and we have very sharp clarity before we move. So I think in a dynamic environment, we have to move a bit quicker. Okay. And for us, I think we are also quite clear going forward that modeling have to have a clear application and fit for use. So not all models can be digital twin for everything and give us all the answers that we need. So, and in a way, models are not just a predictive tool. It's a way to help us think about the world, or think about how the city works. So I think there's this quote I quite like from that talked about, we shape the cities and the cities shape us thereafter. In a way, models are the same. We build the models and they shape our thinking thereafter. So in a way, it's how we think about the world. Yeah. So it's an articulation of how we feel that the world works. Yeah. But I think we're also clear that while we try to simplify the world to help us understand it, the models have to be fit for the purpose that we are trying to use it for. Yeah. And the range of tasks that we try to apply the model range from something very simple decisions to very complex decisions that have a multi-year, multi-decade even, or multi-generation impacts at different scales that we talked about, at the local scale, at the neighborhood scale, or even at the city scale. So the models must be fit for purpose. And we find that, I think previously when I heard Michael Batty talks about his story about the map, when you have a one-to-one map, effectively is no longer a map. So actually what you remove from the model, in the representation of the model is as important as what you keep inside. Yeah. So models should, in a way, represent only what is necessary for your decision. Okay, what kind of decision? So for simple issues, I think we don't have to kill ourselves to try to exhaust all the theory and to build a very complex model for simple decisions. But for complex issues, it's not possible to get a very authoritative insight or a simple solution. And we may have to build up multiple submodels to aggregate and to interact. And I think for us, the simplest way to look at complex models is to build it in a modular form so that each subcomponent you can take out and remove, and you can interoperate and you can connect the dots. So we have been using have been working with the academia to build some of these models to help us in our planning processes. So it ranged from the simple to the complex, and it ranged from single issues to multiple issues. It ranged from topics that are quite challenging to very simple to very challenging. Yeah, and simple models gives us, I think, things that we find that they are more useful for things like very operational short-term decisions, usually at the smaller scale, shorter timeline, and usually single dimension or maybe dual dimensions. And these models, the good thing is it can be easily validated, and a lot of times there are already commercial packages that can be used, and the technology evolves quite quickly to meet the needs, and you can and we find that it's useful for very short-term decision making for our governmental work. Yeah, and for all these models, accuracy is important. Yeah, for example, for us, if we want to use some of these models to highlight homes or highlight the units that flout the rule for, let's say, for short-term stay, etc., we want to be accurate because we don't want to go and disturb people who are not illegally subletting the house. Yeah, so accuracy is important. Yeah, so it tends to be more linear. Yeah, and I think this is a very simple example. So our colleagues in LTA does this for road junction simulation models. Okay, so some of the factors, whether it's the width, the turning, the user friendliness, the traffic light timings, etc. So the parameters are set, and then they have an objective. All the cars must be able to clear the junction within, let's say, 3 traffic light changes. So these are very simple objectives, very easy to model, and also very easy to validate the success of the performance of the junction. However, we also have a range needs that require complex models for more strategic direction. So we are looking at things that are longer time scale as well as larger geographical scale. So using the transport model again as an example, this is our what we call the strategic transport model, where we look at major expressways or major MRT lines. Where do we build? When do we build? Where do we build? Etc. And I would say these models give us a best guess visual of the future. So it's difficult to validate because it's over such a long time, And do you measure the success at the opening of the line or after the line has been operating for 10 years? It's highly contextual. And it's coupled with many other decisions that don't depend on you. So where do people choose to buy their homes? Where do they stay? Where do the kids go to school? Actually, many of the decisions are very difficult to understand and then incorporate because the decision is not fully within your control. And the model output may not lead to a clear decision point, but how generalizable it is, I think that was what Louis also talked about, and how it can help us in our thinking. At least gives us certain range of possibilities and maybe certain trigger points when we need to start to act. I think it's still useful. So as Michael Batty said, all models are wrong. So we are very clear that some of these complex models are wrong, but it's still useful. Okay, so another one of our grant calls that we launched a few months ago, this was end July, was on activity location choice modeling. So this is to actually augment our strategic transport model. Okay, historically, we have used the STM for almost 2 decades. It's very much gravitational based, but now we are trying to add in some of the new science like agent-based choices into the model. So this is the grant call that we have put out a few months ago, and hopefully that will help advance our thinking as a module to advance our thinking in the strategic transport model. So the last example I talked about was the multiple stakeholders. So this is another grant call that I launched, and this one is still open. This grant call is still open. And where we actually are trying to build multifunctional corridors for ecology and humans. So I'm no longer looking after humans, I'm also looking after ecology. So we're not just planning for humans, we are planning for other life forms as well, so animals and plants. So in a way, the complexity has just gone up multiple fold. We are very used to modeling human behaviors. So in this project, I'm sure the people who look at pedestrian modeling and how to design good walkways, etc., will come in. But we also need the ecologists. And when we had the pre-grant call workshop, our scientists looking at ecology will tell me, okay, spiders is different from insects. Birds are different from bees. Reptiles are different from mammals, and they're all different. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the needs have gotten a lot more complex. But here what we're trying to do is to understand the ecology connectivity as well as how to interact with the human connectivity. And we are trying to make hopefully the research can help us come up with some decision-making frameworks and come up with some planning and design interventions that we can implement in our corridors. So as one of the strategies in our long-term plan that we shared last year, we will have ecology corridors. We also want to extend our mobility corridors, whether it's cycling paths or walkways, etc. But because Singapore is so small, we can't have single use. So we're trying to bring them together. So how can we do that in a smart way? So hopefully the science can help us apply some of this knowledge and give us the design planning interventions that we need. Okay, so I'm reaching the end of my talk. So how do we think about how to apply science of cities? So for us, when we do some of this grant calls and some of this research, I think we are very clear. The knowledge from research is only useful when we can translate into some actionable insights. Otherwise, it's a nice tidbit knowledge, but we can't do anything with it. Okay, so for the knowledge of research, I think it expands our awareness of how some of the factors affect us. So we talked about mental well-being being affected by the built environment. There is literature to say that it is one of the big factors. but which are more important? What do we need to prioritize in terms of spending, in terms of provision, etc.? How do we understand second or third order effects? Because when we talk about the simple models, typically you just look at the first order effects. That's good enough, yeah, for a lot of the decision that we need to make. But when we look at complex problems, we need to understand second or third order effects. So how do we understand that? And it also allows us to think about how to fine-tune our planning approaches when we are planning for multiple needs, more complex problems at different scales, geographically and temporally. Yeah. So ultimately, how do we use the models to prioritize, to plan, to inform? Yeah. And where we don't have the models, maybe we have to start from a simpler, just having some key indicators for performance. That may be the way to start. Yeah. And then we have to act. So as the government, we cannot just live with the insight. The additional knowledge that's created is not good enough. We have to act on it. And I think the message I also have for some of my bosses sometimes is also that we need to continuously build on the knowledge. The research is continuous. It's like the city is always a work in progress. The knowledge is always a work in progress. Yeah. And so I will also tell my bosses that we need to have a consistent investment in time capital and manpower. Now, not just with our academia partners, industry partners, but internally to build up the capability to constantly improve our understanding of the city. We're trying to understand the city so that we can plan better for its needs. Yeah, and that requires us to constantly invest in R&D. And to be patient with us, because many of this knowledge takes a long time. I talked about the need for longitudinal studies. So if I want to see some of the effects manifested, it may take years before it affects the mental well-being, health, and shows up in the data. So I think we need to be prepared to be patient. But how can we also move ahead without having full information? I gave the EV example. We don't always need full information to move ahead. Yeah. And I think we also need to be fairly disciplined about how do we integrate the research knowledge into our processes. Yeah. So we have to constantly think about it. So the end state, I think this is something that the government agencies, we have to think about quite seriously. How do we re-engineer some of our business processes to take in some of this new knowledge? Because our processes have historically been built on past knowledge. Yeah, but as new knowledge come in, how do we need to change our processes? How do we have critical conversations with our partners in the academia, on the knowledge gaps, and how do we apply some of this research to enhance our understanding? Because I think, as Michael Batty talked about, you have a lot of rules of thumb, but it's not science. Okay, so we are trying to do more research to expand the knowledge of science. Yeah, so it's grounded, and then when we have conversations with the subsidiary, we also have conversations that are grounded in science rather than based on rules of thumb, heuristics, and all that. Yeah. So we have a common vocabulary. And in terms of technology, I talked about many of the models need to be fit for use, and we have to integrate it into a whole. It cannot be, I have one model for every single amenity, every single application. We have to integrate it. And at the end of the day, to simplify how we use it and how we operate, for my colleagues in IS, don't have to keep changing the whole system every time some part gets updated with new knowledge. It has to be modular and interoperable. Yeah. So we have to think about how to sustain the system within our government processes when new knowledge comes in and we update. Yeah, because it's constantly a work in progress. So with that, I thank you. I hope I give you some insights on how we use science in our work as planners. Thank you.